Hey booktube, it's Tara and this is my March wrap-up part 2. So I'm going to talk about the next 8 books that I completed in the month of March. So first, Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This book I did not enjoy. I know that's an unpopular review right now, but this is a romance novel involving a young lady by the name of Grace Porter. She is a lesbian. She goes to Vegas and she ends up marrying this girl that she just met there. For me, this book, there wasn't much going on in the story, and it was more of a millennial take on making rash decisions at a young age, and I guess I just could not relate to the story, so it never really grabbed me. I was never really into the romance. I didn't really buy the chemistry or I don't know if it was necessarily insta love, but I think it was just a tad bit too young for my liking for me to say that I really enjoyed and really got this story. So 1 star for me. The next book I'll talk about is a work of nonfiction called When Chickenheads Come Home to Roost by Joan Morgan, and I absolutely adored this book. This book focuses on Black feminism and what strong Black women have garnered from following the rules that our culture has ingrained in us. This book was very relevant. I felt it was very relatable to the everyday, educated, even non-educated, working class, strong, feminine, do what you gotta do, Black woman. A quote that I'll read you from this book just so you can get a gist of just a part of what this book has to give. Truth be told, there are a few things we could learn from our chickenhead sistren. When it comes to maximizing the resources the good Lord gave them, girlfriends are nice with theirs. Chickens always look good. They don't drop their drawers unless there's something valuable to garner out of the exchange. And they recognize the intrinsic value in occasionally allowing a man to just be a man. Basically, chickenheads accept that in a male-dominated society, obsessed with both beauty and sex, there is something to be said for women effectively working their erotic power. Now, again, this is a smidgen of the book. This is not necessarily what the entire book is about, but again, a nonfiction work that kind of deals with Black femininity and I would say Black feminism as well. So 5 out of 5 stars for me. Next, I read Sleeping Beauties by Stephen King. I gave this book 2 stars. This was a tome of a read. It had so many characters to keep up with, but the premise of the book was the women of a certain town called Dueling mysteriously all fall asleep, and then they are wrapped in this gauze-like cocoon, and they cannot be arisen out of their sleep. And if you try to wake the women, you are in for a nasty surprise. So this is basically kind of like a view at what the struggling patriarchy would look like if all women were to suddenly disappear. This book had talking animals, it had meth heads. There was even a dedication in the beginning of the book to Sandra Bland. So although it was a promising premise for me, it just kind of drug on, and eventually I started to feel kind of bored with the story. I felt like there was not really much action going on, and the action that did happen was so far and few between that it really didn't keep my interest all the way through. So again, 2 stars. Next, I read this book, Yellow Wife by Sadeqa Johnson. This is a short novel. If you consider about 280 pages to be short. If you've heard anything about this book and you heard rave reviews on it, justifiably so, this book was 5 out of 5 stars. It is a slave narrative, and I believe it's based off of a woman by the name of Mary Lumpkin at a slave jail in Richmond. But the story follows Phoebe Dolores Brown, and she is the product of a slave master and his slave. So she's a biracial woman. She was promised freedom at a certain age, I believe when she turned 18. However, the master's wife, for whatever reason, did not like Phoebe, and through a course of events, Phoebe is of course not freed and ends up being sold off to one of the most brutal slave plantation jails known to man. And we follow Phoebe's life there as she becomes the new slave master's mistress. I don't even know if I should call her the wife. I guess she was technically the wife because he took on a yellow wife. And you basically follow Phoebe's story as she is torn between helping her own people while maintaining some sort of normalcy in the life that she has now been thrust into to be this white man's wife and bear his children. This book, if you've heard anything about it being graphic, if you've heard anything about you needing to have your mind in order and your mind right before you read it, I do agree with both of those sentiments. It is very graphic in its depictions of slavery and what happens. Also, you do need to have your mind right because some of the scenes are extremely brutal and a lot to deal with. There were times when I wanted to put the book down. However, I was so engaged and engrossed in the story and I wanted to know what happens next. So 5 out of 5 stars. I definitely recommend it. Next, I read a short anthology called Milk, Blood, Heat by Dantiel, Moniz. Anthologies are kind of hard to rate. I did give it 2 out of 5 stars. Every story within this anthology dealt with either milk, blood, or heat, sometimes all 3. Obviously, some stories you relate to and they grab you more so than others, but a lot of the stories, mostly all of them, were unfinished. And I think that's what struck me the most, is because I wanted to have an ending to these stories. I needed completion and I just was not getting that. Again, this book was just okay for me. The very first story started off with a bang as it followed 2 young best friends, one black, one white, and a suicide is committed. And we don't end up finding out the reason why, because again, the story is unfinished. So I think that's my only real con with this book. Had the stories been finalized, I may have enjoyed it better. My next 5-star read for the month of March is a book called Black Buck by Mateo. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce his last name. I don't wanna mess it up. Again, 5 out of 5 stars. This follows a young man by the name of Darren. He is young, he is black. I believe he lives in New York. He was the valedictorian of his high school, but then he ends up working at Starbucks as a barista, loves his job, does an excellent job at it, but then he gets offered from one of his Starbucks customers an opportunity of a lifetime to go work in corporate America. And so you go through Darren's journey as being a young black professional. He's the only black in this new corporation. You see a lot of the microaggressions that he has to deal with. There's an element of surprise mystery as well as suspense and kind of thriller toward the end, because the book takes turns that you really don't see coming. There's a lot of wisdom that he gives, and the way that it's written, I truly appreciated it, because the author, the story, is talking to you, and Darren is telling you a lot of times in the book to listen, hey, pay attention, underline this, you know, bold or highlight this, because this is important in your future, specifically if you are learning to or deeming to become a professional working in corporate America, specifically sales in corporate America. So I love this book, devoured it, 5 out of 5 stars. Probably should have ended my video on an up note with my 5-star reads, but I'm kind of going in the order that I read for the month of March. So unfortunately, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab was only 2 stars for me. This is my first V.E. Schwab book, and I do certainly and wholeheartedly agree with the fact that she is a beautiful writer. The way she writes is just, it's poetic. It's artful. It's like an art form to read the words on the page and how they flow and how the paragraphs, and just her sense of scenery that's built, you know, when she crafts, you know, this work of art. It was gorgeously written. However, the story was a bit long-winded. It follows Addie LaRue, who at a young age makes a deal with the devil because she's trying to get out of being forced to marry a young man and live a life, I guess, of contriteness and boredom. So the devil grants her a wish of getting to live for 300 plus years. The only downside to that is no one remembers who she is. Like literally the moment she meets someone, she can go into a coffee shop, order a coffee. If that barista turns around and sees her again, they will not have any clue who she is and will introduce themselves again like she was not just there. It's kind of hard to relate to a character that lives this long, has seen scores and centuries of the world as it progresses forward, and no one remembers you. She's built up like tips and tricks of her own to get by in life, this lonely life that she's living. Well, plot of the story is she ends up meeting this one guy one day that does remember who she is, and the story takes off from there. And his story is interesting as well. And I'm not going to say how because that'll give away a spoiler, but they end up having some things in common. Like I said, this book was entirely too long. I felt like the moments where the book did pick up and there was some action happening and there was a bit of forward movement, the storylines and the paragraphs and the chapters in between were just nothing. So beautifully written, but not my cup of tea. And so the last book I'm going to talk about is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This book follows a woman named Nora Seed, and she's fed up with her life. She decides she's going to kill herself. And that's not necessarily a spoiler because it happens so early in the book. Well, she ends up in a place in between death and life called the Midnight Library, where all of the books on the shelves are different versions of your life had you made different choices in your life. The premise was excellent. The execution, not it for me. I just felt like the book fell flat. I felt that the story could have been bigger and better and bolder in some sort of way, but every life, every version of a life that she chose to live wasn't really all that exciting. So I finished it, but it wasn't that great of a read. I rank it about 2.5 stars. So sorry to end on a kind of low note, but those are the 8 books for part 2 of March. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully I'll be back in April. I'm starting to kind of feel like none of the books I'm picking up recently are really holding my attention. So I'm not sure what that's about, but I'm trying to push through. So thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I will see you in the next one. Bye.